I just immediately popped out of my body and was looking at myself in the face. No real recognition that I'm dead. Later, actually, I'll share a different part of my story today that I haven't shared before, but it definitely changed me.
Are you under the impression that you've lived, multiple lives up until this point?
Yes.
How many individual entities are doing this? Welcome, everyone, to our Sliver of Time. Today, we have a very special guest, Angela Harris, who has had multiple near death experiences and is also working with IANDS, the International Association of Near Death Studies. We're happy to have you on.
And I'm happy to be here, Dave. Thanks for inviting me. I'm excited to tell my stories. Is there anything you wanted to ask or share before I get started?
I would like to jump right into your near death experiences, but I do have one question beforehand, if you don't mind. This question is actually for you and the audience. I'm curious what their answer would be as well. How often are you anticipating your own mortality, right? Like, how often does the inevitability of your own mortality come to mind? I'm just curious.
It really doesn't. Death doesn't mean anything to me anymore. It's a transition. I definitely have experienced something in this lifetime which lets me know that if I were to get hit by a bus in some sort of Hollywood style way tomorrow, that I can still watch my family here. I can still love them from afar. They're aware that I would be on the other side now because I've shared that with them. So I really don't think about it. Now, that said, I didn't really think about it before either. It just wasn't something that was on my mind. I do have a very special person in my life that's getting older and is kind of heading towards that direction. And I think about them more than I think about my own mortality and how they're going to move into that space. And what a beautiful, enjoyable moment it is when you have the awareness that near death experience gives you, when you have the awareness from just listening to near death experience stories about what happens during that transition, what happens on the other side. Shared death experiences are amazing for helping with that as well, because in the shared death experiences, you're really able to see the slower process and how your family members who are by your side as you're transitioning can go through some of it with you. So I think it's important then, and this is a great question because I wouldn't have talked about it otherwise. I think it's important then to really talk about this with your family, which can be hard. Don't get me wrong. I certainly know how, it can be, people will back off if they're not comfortable with it. But if you read the room and you kind of plant a seed, if you will, and start talking about it more and more, it can bring people a lot of comfort to know this, to help them if they have any anxieties surrounding death.
You've had two near death experiences. My understanding is that one was when you were a younger child. Do you mind sharing that story first?
Not at all. I don't mind sharing. It was complete accident. I was playing with my dad in the driveway, and we had a little curb there, like a 4-inch curb. And he wanted me to practice listening, I guess. He would call to me and kind of move around, and I would close my eyes and I would listen and then walk towards him. But I ran into the curb and I fell over the curb and I hit my head on a tree, and there was a little piece of branch sticking out and it went into my skin right above my eye, right here. I still have a scar. So if you're around me sometime, you can take a peek. Um, and I got stuck on the tree and he had to grab me and pull me off. And it must have hit just the right spot. I was bleeding profusely. My hands were red. His hands were red. He picked me up. He started yelling for my mother, took me to the house. My mom opened the door. I remember her turning white and just my hand, like I remember my hands, just looking at my hands and thinking, what the heck is that? They were bright red. And I think that's when I probably passed out because I don't remember anything after that. I just remember waking up, if you will, in the corner of the room. So in that experience, I don't have any memory of exiting my body like I do in my second near-death experience. I just was in the corner of the room, up in the ceiling on the left side. It's always the left side, above the door to that room. And I could see inside the room, just like if I were, alive in my body. I could see my mom sitting on the sofa. I could see myself laying on the sofa. And then I could see outside, I could see my father outside with an ambulance and an ambulance driver, EMT. I don't know if he was the driver specifically, but with an EMT. And they were talking. And I was wrapped in the arms of a female angel. And it was a beautiful moment. I felt all of the love that I felt in my second experience. She was over me. So her back would be up, if you will, and she was holding me like this. So I was underneath her, able to see the room. And I felt the tunnel behind me. And I remember looking at the tunnel, but I don't remember going into the tunnel. We stayed there in the corner of the room. And very interesting that in my second near death experience, I learned that that was my mother in law. You know, no accidents in life. I don't know if that's entirely true, but it's incredible to me that she would have been alive in that moment, awake in the same city I was in. And yet, in my near death experience, here she is holding me wrapped in her arms. So, it to me is an example of how our souls are doing things without our awareness, that our mind is not fully cognizant of in every moment. That she was able to be there with me like that. Or perhaps it was a different part of her soul. So, something else that I saw is that, our souls are in different places at different times. It's like one big soul, and you're just a part of it. And parts of that larger soul are off, getting into shenanigans in other places. And so maybe that was just a different part of her core soul, if you will. So I woke up on the sofa. So it was a very short experience, but it definitely changed me. I was very spiritual without knowing that I was spiritual. So after my second near death experience, I didn't change a whole lot. I think because I had had that childhood experience. My parents were not religious. I didn't have any words to talk about it. It felt like a dream to me when I woke up from it. So I didn't talk about it with anyone. But I did go to church with my grandmother, who went to a very dogmatic church. If you didn't do things the way they wanted you to do it, well, then you were going to hell. That there was no two ways about it. I also went to church when I was in high school with someone that I was dating, and it wasn't as dogmatic. What got me there was it was when I was in high school, and the other high school kids would go there to church. And at church, they were all, oh, we're so good. Look at us at church. And then, after school, they were doing stuff that was not at all in alignment with what church would want them to do. They were getting into shenanigans. So it was very hard for me to watch that, having this spiritual experience as a child that opened me up, and it helped my soul remember.
After you have this near-death experience as a younger child, like for you, is this like almost opening Pandora's box? Like that's kind of the way that I put it. Would you say it's a similar feeling for you, or like how do you handle this mentally? Did it put stress on you? Was it distracting, or was it more like reassuring? Was it weird that other people are not really talking about it all the time?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I haven't really thought about it from that standpoint before. I didn't so much think about it a lot. Like I was saying, I didn't have a way to talk about it. I didn't have anyone to talk about it with. And so I just kind of rolled on through life. But it definitely affected the way that I approached everything. So while I wasn't thinking about it a lot, I wasn't talking about it a lot, it was impacting everything, not the way my second one did. That's like a whole, like ripping off a band-aid or something. I mean, it was like set your back on your heels kind of change. So, like the example I was talking about with going to church, my grandmother was at the funeral of an aunt who was so loving and kind and sweet and amazing. And my grandmother had the audacity to say out loud at this woman's funeral, "Oh, she's going to hell because she didn't believe in Jesus. So, obviously, this is what's going to happen to her." And it just stuck with me that I would remember my grandmother saying that when I was a kid. I mean, at a funeral, obviously, it greatly impacted me and expresses how that childhood experience left a mark on me. That's not really a great way to say it. I think it's better to say, put me more in touch with my true self and my soul, helped me remember, pulled back the veil a little bit, if you will. And it was the same thing in high school. I would watch these kids being so pious at church and then knowing what they were doing and how they were talking about people, which comes up later. Actually, I'll share a different part of my story today that I haven't shared before. Just being so two faced, which again, that doesn't entirely fit, but it expresses what I mean, right? That in one circumstance, you're this way, and in another circumstance, you're like a totally different person. And how I had a very hard time with that. I mean, it was like, what are you doing? This doesn't make sense. I would sit in church and listen to the pastor or priest talk and think, this is great stuff. People really need to hear it. And then other parts of it, I would think, wait, that doesn't align with me, with what I know on the inside. So yeah, I mean, it definitely changed me. And the childhood group for IANDS really has brought that home for me more because I'm able to listen to other childhood experiencers share their stories, and we're able to talk about things like this, to ask each other questions about, you know, hey, when you were a kid and you saw kids doing, bad behavior, did it bother you? And literally everyone in the room is like, yeah, big problem with it. We didn't participate in it. We just watched it from afar and thought, what the heck are you doing? Yeah, that was more impactful than I gave it any credit, before my second near death experience.
So before we get into the second near-death experience you had later on in life, what do you believe is actually like the neurological effects that like these dogmatic religions have on, like you're saying, young children, especially, not even to the degree where like if you give a young child an exorcism, that's got to be astronomical, uh, like full-grown adults saying, yeah, you're possessed by a demon. But even just the idea that you break the rules, you break God's rules, you're going to hell. Like, do you think this affects children in like a negative way in terms of like you're strickening them with fear from such a young age? Like, what is this doing to their body living in fear for so long? I'm just curious if you've ever thought about that.
Yeah, I have read about that a little bit. I was a teacher of elementary school children, so I studied that a little bit, and I think it's more damaging for a child than it is for an adult. There's a lot of great research that's available to anyone on the effects of stress and trauma. And so imagine doing that to young children, right? That you're putting them in this highly stressful state in a way to manipulate them to behave in a way that the way you want it to be. It's got to be lasting for them. Sure, it's very similar to, the adult changes that happen with cortisol and all of that. That's a really interesting question
Well, it,
to
you know,
consider.
just on the grounds, yeah, it
Really.
just came to mind, like just on the grounds that, if stress could make you physically sick, it's like you're doing this
Exactly.
to.
And that, but actually, that it makes you physically sick. That was a great way to put it because it reminds me of teaching and how the kids that I had that came from stressful homes that had a lot of chaos in them and violence, drugs, things like that, they were sick all the time. They really were. And some people could say, well, it wasn't a clean home. Well, no, I mean, some of these kids came from extremely clean, wealthy homes with very successful parents, but they were still sick all the time, just like the kids who came from, when I say abused in a very terrible way, you might think of this, house that's filthy and they're poor, but it's the same across the board.
So you had a second near-death experience. How old were you when that one happened?
42.
42. Okay, and I understand that you were having some sort of neurological test with like an upside down table. Do you mind bringing us like to that moment how this happened?
Yes. So I had had a lot of different kinds of health issues, and it kind of finally came to a boiling point where I ended up in an ambulance and I went to the hospital. And that's what really made myself and my husband say, okay, we really need to hunt this down. So we went to a neurologist, and the neurologist took one look at me and said, oh, you have essential tremor plus, like Parkinson's. It just has a different source to it. And maybe, there might be more going on here because my symptoms were so bad that they were really out of bounds for that kind of illness for that age. So I went to a movement disorder specialist who ordered a tilt table test. A tilt table is designed to keep you still so that you can't move around. A lot of people don't know that when you move around, you're actually doing a lot with your blood pressure. And that was my biggest problem at that point, is that my blood pressure was dropping. It actually had kind of gotten out of bounds by going way too high, which is what sent me to the hospital. But the problem ultimately is that it drops while I'm standing up. So they strap you down, your hands and your feet, your head, you can't move. They tilt this table upright and it's back usually 5 to 10 degrees, it depends. And you're hooked up to all this equipment that measures your vital signs. As soon as I went upright, my husband, who was sitting behind the doctor, was able to watch the screens, and my vital signs went down steady and even like a ski slope. At 18 minutes, I went into seizures to try to revive myself. And that is what ultimately gave them, the full diagnosis of what I had going on. Super helpful, but awful also.
With near-death experiences, it's kind of like the bittersweet, right? Because you have this experience that's, beautiful and everything else, but then, getting there is never fun, at least in my
Yeah.
experience.
Yeah, a lot of trauma surrounding near-death experiences that doesn't always get talked about, that really sticks with people. And PTSD afterwards is a real thing. I have a friend who, she was in a car accident when she was young, and then she had a second experience when she was older after going through cancer treatments. And it was really hard for her for a very, very, very long time. And then also, some people get sent back and they struggle a lot with, why did I get sent back? Am I not doing a good enough job? Am I going to get to go back to heaven the next time I die? Because they usually come from a religious background, and they're dealing with that complicated set of messages that are fed to them constantly about, if you're not doing the right thing all the time, you're going to go to hell. I think I digressed, but
Believe me, I do that all the time. That's my whole problem. I ramble too much. So you start having these seizures as a result of the test, and that's how they found the diagnosis. Your experience doesn't sound like it was that, like you knew you were having a seizure. Like, were you elsewhere? Like, what did you see? What did you hear, if anything?
yes, I was dying. I mean, my vital signs were so low. My brain was deprived of oxygen. My heart was stopping, and I didn't have any feelings. That's the scary part about what's going on with my body. My body doesn't talk to my brain. So I don't even know when I'm about to pass out or feeling sick. I have to have someone there to tell me. So the doctor's asking, hey, how are you feeling? My husband is kind of, nudging me with, you need to be talking about how you're feeling. I'm sure I looked ghostly, but I couldn't even talk because I didn't have the capability to do it. And I didn't feel myself go into the seizures. I just immediately popped out of my body and was looking at myself in the face. Didn't care at all that that was me. It It was like a Toyota Camry and I was done, I'm selling it at the car lot, moving on to something better. It was just totally fine being out of my body. I had no pain, which was beautiful because I didn't have a body. And I was stepping into all of that feeling of love and being at home and being back in a more natural state because I had left my body. And all at the same time, this is all happening so quickly. I was only gone from this planet out of my body for 32 seconds, but I have a very extensive experience, which would take much longer than 32 seconds. And this is part of it. This is an example of it. I exit my body, I'm looking at myself, and all that I'm about to tell you before I get into the tunnel is happening. I mean, as fast as I can snap my fingers, maybe faster. So I am looking at myself. I've exited my body, no real recognition that I'm dead, just feeling great, better all the time. The nurse is standing up from sitting in front of me, going through where my head would be. And I saw her face, and then I saw the back of her head as she kind of passed through me to go lower the table. Saw the doctor, I saw my husband, I heard them talking. I knew what they were thinking. So, beyond just hearing, I was able to see outside of the room. If I thought about it, I was able to access it. I think that's the best way to say it. And I was also moving backwards in the same way to the upper left corner of the room as when I was young. Went to the same location. I was able to, look around the room from this height up there. So yes, it was very quick, but so rich with information.
When you come back into your body, is this like, do you remember how you got back into your body? Or like, if not, what was it like when you actually did open your eyes back inside your body? Was this like you guys have no idea what happened, I gotta tell you? Was it excitement? Was it nervousness? Like, how did that feel?
I got back into my body very suddenly. So at the end of my experience, my mother-in-law, who was holding me when I was a child and had my experience then, how beautiful is that? And also funny that my mother-in-law would say she has to go take care of the children, and I woke up in my body instantaneously. It was very interesting to wake up back in my body. I did not want to be there. I didn't. I mean, it was wet and sticky and dark, and I could kind of like feel down into my body, and it was just black. It was like wearing a big black sack that was human shaped. It was really bizarre. It creeps me out when I think back to that moment, that feeling. It was like I was coming back online with my body. And I guess I was. I mean, I was coming back to life. And I just kept my eyes closed on the table because I thought if I keep my eyes closed and I wish hard enough, pray hard enough, I'll go back. So I just laid there like that for a little bit. Um, well, that's not true. When I first got back in my body, my eyes popped open and I saw the nurse and she had the paddles to revive me, like literally right over my face. Then I shut my eyes and I prayed, just let me stay. Just let me stay in heaven. That's what I want to do. There's no pain. I had seen during my NDE that if I chose to stay there, my family would be fine. My kids would grow up fine. My husband would do well. There would be grief and loss, but that I could communicate with them. And so I was feeling like from the other side, it would be okay. And the big part of that is that when you're on the other side, you have access to all this information. I can see their futures and I can also understand this version of time that here everything seems to go by so slowly. But when you're on the other side, you can see that it's actually only an instant. I could see my whole life and it was like a blink of an eye. when I'm living it here now, it seems like I'm plodding along and it's taking forever, even for, the potatoes to boil. That's the importance of all of this that we need to take away from it is when you're making decisions on the other side, like planning your life. So this is something that comes out of that experience that I learned. When you're planning your life, a lot of people will say, well, why would I plan to come here? It's so hard. Why would I plan to live this terrible life where bad things are happening to me? Well, when you planned it on the other side, it looked a lot different than it does from here. It's, you're looking at it from your angelic self. You're looking at it from the space of how's it going to help myself and all of consciousness grow, and then making a decision about what you're going to do here. So, yeah, when I woke up in my body, I had wanted to stay on the other side because of what I just explained. And it wasn't working, obviously. So um, I heard the doctor say, she's back. I fluttered my eyes open. I saw the doctor holding my husband, Scott, kind of back from coming to me. And he was just saying, give her some time. She just needs some time. And then I just eventually sat up and I did not say anything. I vaguely remember the doctor looking at me as I was trying to process what had happened, looking at Scott a lot with this thing of, I just saw your mom on the other side. Like I really wanted to tell him, but it didn't feel right in that moment. I mean, I was coming back to life, which it's its own challenge. I had just gotten a really bad diagnosis. The doctor's trying to tell me all this stuff about what had happened, what this means, what I need to do to make sure that, I don't pass out in public. There was a lot going on in that room. And no, I ended up not sharing it. But as I was saying just a second ago, the doctor did look at me and say, are you feeling okay? And, something like, did you see something? I didn't watch these stories. I didn't listen to it. I didn't take the time. Now I totally would, because then I would have veridical evidence and all of that, right? So I kind of am sad that I didn't. It just wasn't the right situation.
So you mentioned planning out a lifetime before we come here. I think that's very interesting. There's people that have like pre-birth memories and this type of stuff. It seems potentially plausible, right? You're talking billions of years have gone by. You pop up here for like 70. It would make sense that something else could be going on. Um, I presume that you believe, or let me rephrase that. Do you believe that we live again?
That we live multiple lives.
Yes.
And I'm going to ask for some clarification. Do we live multiple lives on this planet?
Well, okay. So, do we live multiple lives in general in the first place, whether it's on planet Earth or somewhere else? Because obviously, planet Earth has not been around for the entire universe's existence, right?
Yes. Yes. So, yes, I do believe we live multiple lives. I saw examples of that, which I'll share in just a second. We live multiple lives on this planet, on other planets. And I also saw that if I want to come back and be me again, and do this again, and maybe make some different choices if I remember to, I can do that too. So, how I experience that is that.
Oh, so sorry to cut you off, but just while it's insanely relevant, you're saying that we could live the same actual life in like the same, so I could literally be Dave Sledge again in the future, you're saying?
Yes. And the way to approach that is that there's no time. So when you go home, you can choose to go back in time, from where we're sitting right now, trying to explain it, and get back in the same baby that's growing in the mom. So it's exactly the same way as you did it this time. So you would prepare on the other side to, choose your parents. And then when it's time, you would get into that body and then you would start living your life as David Sledge again.
And by the way, I felt bad for cutting you off there.
Oh, no.
That's a new concept for me. I could understand, and I've heard about the concept that we could reincarnate. Um, on a different planet or same planet, different body, but I've never heard the idea that you could, redo the same body again. Are you under the impression that you've lived, multiple lives up until this point?
Yes. So when I was on the other side during my NDE, I was thinking about, I guess remembering all of what occurs on the other side. And part of that is that I was living multiple lives, that my soul is split into different bodies. And at that time, then I would go and experience it. So, like if it was a past life, I'd go kind of be a part of that past life. In this case, I went and visited myself in these other bodies. So, I left this, it's like, I always describe it as a river. Like if you're standing in a river and your hands are out, except this was a river of knowledge. And anything that I thought of, I could access, right? So I'm in that and I'm thinking about this, and the answer is coming to me. And then my soul leaves this river of knowledge and goes into space, essentially. It looks like when you're watching Star Trek, I believe, you're on the ship and they're at warp speed. That's what it looked like to me. And then I came up on this blue being, female, bald, looks actually not unlike me, and very, very small body compared to the head. So can't say, a big head, but just a smaller body than the head compared to our proportions. Very soft nose, very thin lips, entirely blue, like pool blue. In the shadows, more of a cobalt color. I didn't see anything around her, just her that I remember. That memory might come back. I hope it does. And then the biggest part of this is that I came up over her left shoulder. She turned and looked at me. We looked at each other in the eyes. And in that moment, I knew, as much as I know anything else, that that's me in there. That's me living a different life in a different body on a different planet.
If our consciousness is splitting to where we could actually live multiple lives at the same time, so that you said it's like visiting yourself, right? You look at this person and you knew that was actually you in a different body. The question for me naturally is, how many individual entities are doing this, or is it literally one single entity that makes up every single body that we see out there? Like, how many people on Earth do you think are like coming from the same source, or do you think there's multiple different sources?
Yeah. So I love on the Gaia channel the initiation series with Matthias DiStefano. It's incredible. He does a great job describing it. So I definitely point people in that direction. I think of it like a Rubik's Cube. So you think of the Rubik's Cube and how you can pull the little pieces off, right? So it's like my soul is a Rubik's Cube, and those individual pieces are off, doing what they're doing on other planets, and then bringing that information back home to me, my one individual soul. We consult with each other and help each other through what we're going through on these planets, these challenges. But that Rubik's Cube that is me is also a single cube in a big giant Rubik's Cube, right? So I just like plug into the rest of that big giant Rubik's Cube. So that's one way to look at it.
So you've been working for IANDS, the International Association of Near-Death Studies. How long have you been working for them? And I'm actually really curious, like, what kind of got you started? Was this like a calling? You wanted to go in that direction because of passion, or like, how did this come about?
Yeah, well, I couldn't work anymore as a teacher because teachers stand up all day long, and that's what I'm not supposed to be doing, as the tilt table test showed us. So I started staying home, and my kids were much younger then, and it made sense. And right at the same time, we ended up moving. So I had my experience in May of 2015. By August of 2016, we had moved from Houston, Texas to Greensboro, North Carolina. And moving is very hard for me because of my illness. So, my husband's working full time. The kids just started school, so I was managing that, trying to unpack. So that took a year, year and a half for me to really settle into. And by that point, my oldest child had started going to an early college, which required me to drive him back and forth. My younger child was going to like a science academy, which also required the commute. So I spent a couple of years there just moving and healing and commuting. And I was following IANDS because that's really the first place that I started to really understand and get words for what had happened to me, that I had had a near death experience, and finding the space to really be able to talk about it with my husband more thoroughly. And in that, there was an email that came that asked for help with a website for the sharing groups and events that they have. And I had done that. I had done that as a teacher. I had been doing that also for National Charity League, which is a thing that I had started with a friend here. And then a couple of other things that I was doing. I used to also work in anti human trafficking, and there's a local group here that I was working with. I shared those sites with the person who was leading the group at the time, Chuck Swedrock, and he liked what he saw. He brought me on board, and I've been with the organization since then. It's just kind of morphed into, it's not a full-time job, but as the director and, a leader in this part of the organization, I work 3, 4 days a week solid on just IN stuff. It's an honor.
I do very much respect, the whole operation. It's incredible what you guys do, and those of us that are doing this work, I think we all have a mutual respect. So I think it's really beautiful. My next question, actually, one more about IANDS, if you don't mind. What is your favorite part about working for IANDS?
Oh my gosh, the joy and the love. Everybody who's there gets it. They understand it. They're in it. They're swimming in it all day long with what they do, with what they're thinking about. If they're in the car, they're probably listening to a story. So it's really beautiful to be able to work in a space where we can authentically, regularly, platonically say to each other, I love you, and mean it, and be able to share that light in a very open way. It's a release, really, to have that in my life and to be able to also just in a meeting talk about something spiritual. It's not something that I have to hide or worry if I talk about it. How's that going to go over? And it's beautiful. I am so appreciative for IANS, what they do for the community that is there, that supports us, that comes to our sharing groups, that shares their stories with each other to give other people what I've found.
If you could ask one question to the person watching this video right now, what would it be?
Oh, yeah, yeah. What would I ask people who are watching?
It's a
Oh,
tricky one, I know. I
it
don't even
is.
know
There's
how.
so many things are coming to mind right now. I have to pick one. I think I know what it is because it sums up everything that I'm thinking about. So the one question that I would ask people who are listening is, after listening to near death experiences, how can you go forward in your life in a way that brings more joy and more love to everyone you encounter every day?
When people are watching near-death experiences, I kind of just assume they do that for like comfort, or they're looking for answers, like
Right.
existential questions. Do you have any advice for people that might be, unsure of what happens after death? I mean, we all kind of are, but like, what would you say to the people that are on their spiritual journey? They don't know what to believe per se.
Yeah, that they're listening, but they're still hesitant. Is that, yeah.
Yeah,
So,
like might have doubt still.
yeah. And, it's all personal journey. That's the beauty of this. What we take from these stories is what we need to take from these stories. So don't feel pressured to conform and believe that, what you're hearing has to be truth. That's for you to decide based on what you've been through, where you are, and you will get to where you need to be because that's what you're here to do. I will say, to address the skepticism part of it is that there's so much common thread among all these stories. And when you listen to people talk about it, I'm sure you can probably see in me commitment to what we're saying. I mean, it's there. It happened. We believe in it. And there are so many people, thanks to all these podcasts like what you're doing, Dave, we can see it. Just, start YouTube up, Google it, and let it go, right? Search near death experiences and just watch and listen for those commonalities between all of them. Each experience is different. And the reason for those differences is that that's what that soul needed when they went home. Why do some people see a Garden of Eden? Because that's what they need to see. Why did I see a white kind of welcome room? Because that's what I needed to see. That's what my soul expected when it landed there. If we all went, you know, past the waiting room and shot off way down the road into some room where we were planning the next life, we'd probably freak out a little bit. So just, watch, listen, tie the threads together, and understand that the differences that you're seeing are for that person, not for you. And it doesn't mean that it's not real, that it didn't happen because you're seeing differences. It just means that's what was needed in that moment.
If the people want to find you and all the great work that you do, where is it that they can find you?
Well, you can always find me at isgo.iands.org. That's the website for IANDS, the portion that I work with. I'm also at angelaroseharris.com. And you can email me because I love talking about this stuff at Angela at symbol IANDS.org. So that's the at symbol and then IANDS.org.
Angela, thank you so much for your sliver of time. This has been hours. I very much appreciate you coming on, and we'll have to do it again in the future.
Definitely. Thank you, David.
Peace out, everyone.